Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of eCoffee with Experts. I'm your host, Matt Fraser. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about powerful copywriting techniques that every e-commerce brand needs with Tom Tholen. Tom is the president of InQuest Marketing, a full-service marketing agency headquartered in Kansas City, Missouri. He is an award-winning copywriter and knows how to put killer sales materials, merchandising, and advertising pieces together, among other things. When not working on marketing campaigns for clients, Tom enjoys playing golf and spending time with his wife and 4 children at the lake. Tom, thank you so much for being on the show. Pleasure to have you here.
Absolutely thrilled to be here. Happy to share some thoughts with you.
Yeah, thank you. So, hey, you've had an interesting journey so far. How would you describe yourself as a child growing up?
Ambitious, busy, curious, competitive. I'm the youngest of 5, and you kind of fight for your spot when you're the youngest of 5, and I was always that way, and it's funny because that really hasn't changed now that we've all aged and are all well into our adulthood. The sibling rivalries, the competitiveness, all that kind of thing still exists. So it's been kind of fun. Wow. I was reminded of that just yesterday, and we got a big chuckle out of it.
Oh, interesting. That's neat. Yeah, I just have one brother, so I can't relate, but I'll take your word for it. It's how I have to fight for your spot when you're the youngest of 5. I can only imagine.
That's right.
How has that impacted you today then in that experience in your life and your career?
I think that's a really good question. I've never really thought about that before, but that's a really good question. It really is something that does form how you go about your life. I think it made me a better listener, to tell you the truth. Oh. I think you get to experience what your siblings are experiencing before it's your turn to do that. And you see things and you observe things and you kind of formulate your ideas. Okay, when it's my turn to do that, I'm going to do it this way, or I want to do the types of things that this person did, but I want to put my fingerprints on it. So it's going to be this way, not that way. And I think that translates very well into business. I think, there's an old saying that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we're supposed to use them in that proportion. And I think being the youngest family member, I think you kind of have to be that way. And it has really impacted my life. Birth order really has impacted my life. And I think in meetings, somebody once said in meetings, they said, you're very contemplative in meetings. And that when you say things in meetings, it's kind of an E.F. Hutton moment. People kind of sit up and say, okay, he's been thinking about this. Yeah. What do you got? And I thought that was a nice compliment, but as to your question, I think that probably generated from being the youngest and needing to wait my turn. And so, it allows you to kind of think things through. Yeah.
Did you, were you able to benefit from learning from the mistakes of your siblings?
Yeah, probably. And I would, I would say their answer to the question is, well, we didn't make mistakes. So there was nothing to learn from there, which is obviously not true. But I think for sure, we all chose different paths for our formal training and the skills that we have. It's kind of funny that I'm the only one that is in a creative business, and I've always been in a creative business. And I had one relative, and I love talking about him. I have one relative that was in the creative business that I got a lot of guidance from. And he was the most interesting man. Had a really interesting story from day one until his final days. But he had a period. He was an engineer, and he had a period in his life where he just wanted to step away and take a sabbatical. And so he took a 10-year sabbatical. Oh, wow. And wrote cartoons, and was one of the writers for Woody Woodpecker, and worked at the Walter Lantz Studios doing all these really cool things. And so when I got into the creative business initially as a broadcast copywriter and copywriter, and then in my tenure at Hallmark, he was extremely interested. While I was at Hallmark, he used to call me a few times a month and just say, "What are you working on today?" And we'd have a conversation about how he solved creative challenges and some of the things that he faced in his career. The funny thing about him is that he went from engineer. He was a war hero, literally a war hero in World War II.
Wow.
Went to Lockheed and was at Lockheed Martin and was an engineer, wrote cartoons, and then went back to Lockheed Martin. And his perspective on his perspective on life and his perspective on everything was just phenomenal. And I really greatly enjoyed the conversations with him, and he was a real guiding influence. My siblings were as well. My father died when I was fairly young, but my siblings were as well. But Uncle Frank gets a lot of credit for the development of my creative side and my ability to kind of listen to the creative side.
That's awesome. And do you think that's impacted you in your philosophy about learning from others? Like, do you in regards to like, what I'm trying to say is, do you have a philosophy of instead of trying to figure it out on your own, finding people who maybe you can leverage their expertise and ideas, maybe not their ideas, but you know what I mean? Like, for instance, in my life, Anthony Robbins, I read his book, Awaken the Giant Within, changed my life. He said, if you want to find somebody if you want to be good at something, find somebody who's already good at it, learn from them, then do it twice as much. So I guess my question is something like that impacted you as a result of being the youngest of 5 and having to learn from others and seeking out advice from others, or has it been the other way?
No, very much. I think that's another good point. I worked for Jack Welch at GE, and Jack was he had a certain reputation from the outside, but he was a really, really intelligent man. And I think one of his greatest strengths was he knew what he didn't know. And he trusted experts to step in and be the experts on things that he wasn't skilled at. He was decisive, and he was courageous, and he listened very well, and he made really good decisions regarding business. And a big thing that he taught us was hire people smarter than you and allow them to be smart. Get out of their way and allow them to be smart. And throughout my career, I've always known that I was a pretty decent copywriter and could put words together pretty well. But I knew that analytics were important. So I've surrounded myself with good analytics people, and I knew people that were good technicians were good. We hired a kid at GE. This was the craziest thing. We were doing a big hiring thing, and we literally were trying to staff. I had to staff about 100 people in less than 6 months in an area. And, And so we were recruiting from all these great universities, and you'd see these kids come in with these amazing resumes. And we had this young man come in that obviously had social anxiety issues and it didn't have a great resume and came wearing wrinkly khakis and a wrinkly shirt. And he'd gotten the interview because he lived next door to what we called one of our GE heavy breathers, one of the people way north on the org chart. And anyway, through the conversation with him, I came to realize very quickly he was an SEO expert. And didn't use the terminology that we were looking for, but this kid was amazing about building audience and amazing about generating traffic via a website that he and his brother built. And so when I went into HR and said, I want to hire this kid, they all looked at me like I was insane. But I said, did anybody bother to actually talk to him? I said, this kid is a savant. This is the smartest kid that's walked in that door in months. And we need to hire him right away. And we did. And literally 2 months later, I was invited to Crotonville, which was a training facility that GE owns, to do a presentation on the web best practice on search engine optimization. And if they only knew, it came from a kid that was that had a 2.3 GPA from an okay school, and his most relevant experience was stocking shelves at a general merchandise company and also working a second shift at Dairy Queen. But he and his brother cracked the code on SEO. And the guy's a millionaire many times over now because that's a niche that needed filled. And
that is amazing.
We were fortunate enough to find him. Yeah, great.
So you took the time to look beyond the disheveled clothing of a young genius and dig in and not judge him based on his appearance. Although, 95% of the people would do that. I would probably be just as guilty, to be frank. and to be upfront. Tom, I mean, be like, I'd probably be one of those people in HR that's like, what are you talking about? But unless I had a conversation with him as well, because it's very, when you have a knowledge of something, like you probably you can read copy and know if it's crappy, good copy or bad copy, So when you have, and when you have a knowledge of business and ideas, you can get a pretty good idea of somebody in that way.
You really do. Yeah. In fact, I remember you're causing a flashback. Now I remember sitting across the desk from him, and I was interviewing him with our CTO. I was the global web development leader in Capital's largest division. And I literally kicked the CTO under the table because he wasn't paying any attention during this interview. And I jotted down SEO expert and circled it a couple of times. And, I had a purchase order on my desk during that interview for $500,000 to a large company that everybody would know. And I canceled it and said, I'm going to give it to this kid. I'm going to give him this responsibility. And it was amazing. And it's all credit to him because he was a genius. We just had that one moment where bars of shafted light shine upon you when you figure out, hey, I'm sitting with an expert.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Well, what impact did working at GE have on your career that you could share about, like that it's impacted you to this day? Like working with Jack Welch. I mean, to be frank with you, that's got to be a flipping amazing experience to have.
It really was. And the impact of that didn't really strike me when it first happened as it did many years later.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting. The very first meeting I was in with Jack was about 2 weeks after I'd started. And I was supposed to go through what my vision was for the interface for all of the capital sites, and particularly on our insurance side and insurance, reinsurance, and medical malpractice. Those businesses really needed a new facing. And so I'm sitting with Jack and a number of other people, and he flipped to page 3 of the presentation, just wanted to get right into it, and started asking all these questions. Just his approach really taught me a lot. But I think the one thing that really, whenever I present, I usually bring this up and I tell people, I said, stop what you're doing, pick up your pen and write this down. One of the things I learned at GE that was so important to what we did there was through Six Sigma. And Six Sigma, the quality program, we were wouldn't say required, but strongly encouraged to certify in Six Sigma, which I did. And one of the important aspects of Six Sigma is this concept of voice of the customer, and how that translates into critical equality. So it was VOC to CTQ. And so VOC, getting the voice of the customer, is getting specifically what types of things your customer is looking for, and how that translates into something that's critical to quality in your delivery. So how do you deliver on the most important aspects of what your customer is looking for? And a lot of companies don't do that. Again, it was another article from years ago, but it was entitled Windows and Mirrors. And many companies prefer to look in a mirror and be reflective of themselves rather than look through a window and be acknowledging who their customer is, and then open that window so they can hear them too. The companies that I believe are successful are companies that follow a window strategy and not a mirror strategy. But most companies are more comfortable following a mirror strategy. So VOC to CTQ is something I am passionate about, and literally use it every day.
Yeah. Do you think there's value in certification? For instance, do you think that, like that Sigma 6 certification, do you think that every business owner should pursue either that course or any other kind of certification? Like there's the OMCP certification, Online Marketing Certified Professionals certification, and there's the Digital Marketing Institute certification. Do you think that's valid? Like, do you think that's something people should do? And what do you think the future trend is of that?
I think the short answer is yes. I think there is value in that,
Okay.
but it maybe not be what you think it is.
Okay.
The Six Sigma certification, in my experience, has
Yeah.
been kind of a door opener.
Okay.
I was invited. We used to have a lot of business with Toyota,
Oh
and
yeah.
I was invited to a Toyota meeting because another large company was sending Six Sigma certified people to a meeting, and they wanted me to go because they knew I was Six Sigma certified. And so I went into this meeting and listened and asked some questions. And I think they knew early on that I had been Six Sigma trained just based on the kinds of questions that I'd asked.
Yeah.
And when we left the meeting, they said, "So Tom, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, they're claiming Six Sigma, but they're not following Six Sigma." And what I mean by that is they came with a solution. They came with a solution that to a problem you don't have. They invented something they wanted to sell. And they came in here
Oh,
under
interesting.
the guise of Six Sigma and said, here's what you need to do. And I asked a question about halfway through the meeting, and I said, what was your VOC that led you to this particular solution?
Yeah.
And they danced around the question to the point was like, okay, you don't have VOC. You didn't ask the customer, and they surely had not asked Toyota at that point either.
Yeah.
So it's been a door opener. I think people know what it is and they respect it. But I'm a bigger fan of lifelong learning. I'm a big fan of taking the free courses on Harvard Business School online.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of courses that you can take. These are short courses that give you really good background information, good foundational information.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a big fan of lifelong learning and taking courses that are available to you. And as we started, we were talking about before you hit the record button. There's so much available online, and I think that people who don't take advantage of that are really missing out on valuable things that they could be getting for free or at low cost in some situations.
Yeah, you and I have that same philosophy. I have the always be learning, and leaders learn. And I've learned that readers are leaders. Leaders learn. If you're ripe, you rot, and if you're green, you grow. So always be learning. And I through my library, public library at the city, we get access to LinkedIn Learning for free with a library card. That's like $50 US a month, and I get access to it for free. And I'm constantly taking courses, even preparing for some of these interviews. Because while I know a lot about subject matters, I mean, there's sometimes I want to dig in a little deeper. And it's interesting, Google is no longer requiring degrees. They'll hire someone without a degree. And so I wonder, like, it's, I for me as a business owner, if I was a marketing, hiring people, I think experience, like if someone showed me that they had ranked a local website, was generating traffic and calls to it, and had Google Analytics or Google AdWords certification, I would put more value on that than someone who had a 4-year degree in marketing with no experience whatsoever.
Well, that story I told about the young man at GE, that's exactly what that was. Is he did have a degree, but his whole thing was, when I asked him how he got the kind of traffic he had, he said he figured out an anomaly on the search engines on rankings and how to boost his rankings, and he built an applet that goes in and continually does that.
Wow.
And I sat back and said, man, I don't care if you got A's and B's from the best school in the country. You know what you're doing, and you're brilliant. And so
So coming back to the voice of the customer, because that's such a fascinating concept, and I didn't know that it was a part of Sigma 6 until today, because I've, going back to LinkedIn Learning, I've taken courses from the person who started Copy Hackers, copyhackers.com. I can't remember her name. Forgive me for who she is, Joanna Weeb. And coincidentally, the company is headquartered where I live, but I learned about voice of the customer from her copywriting course. But how important is voice of the customer? So number one, how did you get into copywriting? Number two, the importance of developing the voice, learning the voice of the customer. to develop proper copy and even buyer personas, customer personas. So I guess the first one I'd like to know is like, what attracted you? Because copywriting is, Bill Glazer said if there's one skill that every entrepreneur and business owner should learn, it's the art of copywriting. And he was Dan Kennedy's business partner. He learned from Dan and turned his men's clothing store around from a failing business to multi-million-dollar company. And so he knows what he's talking about. And so what attracted you to specialize and learn about copywriting?
Well, I guess I'd always been a writer. I wrote for the high school newspaper, and I had a column, and people used to stop me in the hallways and said they really enjoyed it and that sort of thing. So, I got some good feedback back then. I had a teacher that really saw it, and really he just kept exposing me to other types of copywriting. And
that is awesome.
He showed me a series of billboards that came from Fallon McGilligan. And Fallon McGilligan was a great agency in Minneapolis back when I was younger. They did everything very well, but they were really, really good at outdoor boards. And
outdoor boards.
So the school teacher had told me, it's brevity is important. And there's nothing more brief than a medium of outdoor billboards.
Yeah.
So I want you to read a little bit about this guy. And he gave me the Burnett books, the Leo Burnett books, and started getting involved in those. And I thought, wow, I really enjoy this. This is something I really love to see. And then when I got to college and started taking my first advertising courses, I got lucky. And one of the early copywriting courses was taught by a guy who'd just come from an agency in Chicago. And he pulled me aside and he said, I don't tell many kids this, but he goes, you're really good at this. He said, you should think about doing this as a profession. I think you could do very well with this. Yeah. And that was that kind of encouragement that really got me going. And I did a couple of ads on the side for people when I was in college, and I was good at doing the flyers for the parties and things like that. And it just kind of turned into my first copywriting job at an agency. It was fortunate for me and unfortunate for somebody else. There was an agency that was kind of downsizing because the economy was a little rough in Denver, and they let go of a veteran and brought me in as a 22-year-old kid to be a writer and broadcast producer. And because the person that I'd gotten the job, his spot, he did a lot of radio and TV, and all my professors were saying, you're not going to be able to do TV for the first few years because that's really the prime stuff. And I'm sitting there on my very first day at this agency writing a TV commercial. And I thought, holy smokes, this is not what I thought, but it was terrific exposure. I think when I left that agency after 2 years, I left with a couple of Clio Gold Awards and 180 some radio spots and 70 some TV spots and a couple of print pieces. So
in your first 2 years.
Yeah, it was a busy place, but you get that kind of exposure, you get a little bit of reinforcement, and you kind of figure out that hey, this is something I enjoy and something I'm good at, and more importantly, something that creates an effect. I'll tell you a real quick story about a real milestone moment for me. We had done an ad for a client, and when we got the job jacket for it, I looked at it and I thought, man, this is a great opportunity. And I came with this really, really creative idea on how to advertise this particular sales. It was a high fashion retailer in Denver. And so we rotoscoped the spot, which is the old video "Take on Me" by the band Aha. It goes back and forth between like comic book and live action. We rotoscoped this spot, and I literally did 2 all-nighters in a row, overseeing the editing on that. I wasn't the editor, but I was overseeing it and approving every single drawing because I wanted it to be perfect. Yeah, and so we get this spot completed, and it's unbelievable. I mean, it's a really cool spot, and the client. A couple weeks after this thing ran, the client called us over the office, the creative director and me. And we go over there, and I'm thinking on the car ride over, he's going to throw rose petals and they're going to throw a parade for us because this ad was so darn good. And we get in there, and the guy closes the door and just screams at us for 30 minutes. It was unbelievable. And he said, I should fire you on the spot. We should pull our account from your agency. You have no idea what your job is. That this didn't generate a single bump in traffic at all. And he said, you did this because you knew you'd win awards. And he was pointing at me, and he was right. He really was. And so we leave the meeting, and we get on the elevator. As soon as the elevator doors close, creative director looks at me and goes, man, what a jerk. And I said, no, he's right. He's absolutely right. We've forgotten what the purpose of what we do is. We were selfish about this. And it was a milestone moment for me. It really,
amazing.
Put a focus on what is your job and how to best do your job.
Here, I thought you were going to tell me that it was a whiz banger and made the millions of dollars. And so it didn't do what it was supposed to do.
No, but and conversely, I've got a I don't even know if the gold lion or silver lion from the Cannes Film Festival up on the shelf for an ad I absolutely hated. And I thought it was trite and awful, but others didn't. So it just goes to show,
Wow.
A very large one. Yeah. They told me they were entering it in the Cannes Film Festival, and I'm like, it's a waste of money. I hated that ad. I turned that script in, and I hated it. But it was, and other people liked it.
And it did well. Did it generate revenue? Obviously,
we must have. Yeah.
How could it not? If it got an award, I mean, there's got to be some kind of success measure tied to.
The ones that I think are better, I'm not sure. The Mobius and the Effies have got a handful of those too, and those ones take into account sales effect and which I really appreciate. The Clios and film festivals, things like that, are really just based on artistic value.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, copywriting needs to sell. I think you would agree, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's my thing is the one for the fashion merchandiser, it didn't sell. And the one from the Cannes Film Festival apparently did. But I think that's the job. I mean, if you want to do something different than write poetry, but copywriting, the job of copywriting is to encourage a new behavior and to create some sort of positive financial impact.
Yeah. Salesmanship in print, they say, is what it is.
Yeah.
In that regard, how have you seen, like, for instance, in regards to e-commerce, because there's lots of things we could talk about pertaining to copywriting, and it's such a vast subject. And to be frank with you, I love it. Are there any other, I can mention the people that I learned copywriting from. For instance, if someone were to come to you today, Tom, and say, hey, who are the top 5 people? Or let's make it easier for you, top 3 people that I want to learn copywriting. Who are the top 3 people I should learn from?
I don't think they're copywriters, to tell you the truth. Yeah. I've become a huge fan of Simon Sinek, because I think Simon Sinek has done a very good job of refocusing on what's important. And the structure of copywriting is very much that way. His whole notion of the what, the why, and the wait.
I've read his book.
Yeah, start with why.
Yeah,
it's fantastic. I was in a meeting. I'd never heard of him before, actually. Before about 6 months ago, I was in a meeting with one of our clients, and we were talking about it's a software company. We were talking about some new enhancements that they had, and I was listening. And towards the end of the meeting, I said, I think we're being too transactional and not transformational with our thinking. Yeah. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, we're focusing on the transaction, and somebody can knock off our widgets. Their R&D will start the day we introduce this and knock off our widgets. They can imitate us. But what they can't imitate is the ability that we have to transform the industry that we're focused on. And kind of got up on my soapbox about that. And after the meeting, somebody said, you must be a big Simon Sinek fan. And I said, I have no idea who you're talking about. So I went and did a little bit of research and did a little bit of YouTube actually, and looked at a couple of his talks, and they're amazing. I think, he's not a trainer of copywriters, but he is, he would be a fantastic trainer of copywriters because his messaging strategy is spot on.
Wow.
And what are the things that resonate with a consumer? And his whole thing is, if why is in the middle, why are you doing something? The how is the next concentric circle out, and that's kind of the technical capacity of how something comes together. And the what is specifically what you do. And he uses Apple Computer a lot in his examples. And
that's what exactly came to my mind as you were talking.
Yeah.
Apple's
and I think
perfect example.
Yeah, I really like him. And I think, in Apple's advertising throughout the years. In fact, years ago, I was for a piece that I worked on, it was a finalist at the Emmy Awards. And it was the first time advertising had been allowed at the Emmys. And we were up against, it was a good commercial. I loved the commercial that we had up for the Emmys, and was very passionate about it. But I found out that we were up against Level or Blinds. They had a commercial, and then Apple Computer did. Yeah. And I said, which commercial is it? And they said, it's the Einstein commercial that Richard Dreyfuss did the voiceover on. And it's an amazing commercial. And I thought, we're toast. There's no way. There's no way. This was at Hallmark, and there's no way we're going to win that. And then when I got the news that Apple had won, I said, well, that's a better commercial. I mean, it was
rightly so. It was deserved.
Yeah. The concept was amazing. It was well written. It was well composed. Everything about it was great. So it just was sometimes just have to tip your hat and say, yep.
Absolutely.
That was a really good one.
Okay. That's awesome. So in regards to, I guess, coming back to e-com and writing, like the importance of writing copy for product titles, product descriptions, I'm just going to share a little bit to set this up. Like, when I was working as the marketing director at the car dealership, which will go unnamed, I got there and they were wondering why they weren't getting any leads. And car dealers are very much like e-com. It's just you're not buying online yet. You're filling out a form, and there's 4 different conversions for the form, 4 different forms for the conversion. I'm interested, test drive, financing, get pre-approved, whatever. But they were, sorry, I have to laugh. They were driving traffic to product pages. We call them VDPs in the car industry, vehicle detail pages. They're the single product pages for the car. Bin specific. And they had no pictures, no video of the car, no product descriptions, and there was really crappy titles. And they were getting huge bounce rates. And and they were spending tons of money. I had to shut everything off and go, whoa. We're not spending any money until we get the foundation right. But when we started to craft those descriptions, Tom, to be frank with you, I found a website that has a database of all the descriptions for all the vehicles going back the past 15 years. Literally, you select things from a drop down, year, make, model, right down to the model type, like 2010 Ford F-150 XLT or XR or whatever, blah, 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 even the color, and it spit out the product description for that. And man, the conversions went up. It was incredible, just from copywriting and proper merchandising of the pictures. But pictures aside, obviously those are important in e-commerce. But what has been your experience in the importance of writing good copy for product descriptions in order to engage and convert visitors?
Yeah. Again, I'll go back to the VOC thing. One of the first articles I wrote was entitled "Think Like a Customer, Act Like a Brand."
Yeah. And, what a great, I got to read it.
It's a good article. It came from back in my days at Hallmark, and we used to send, I used to send my staff out to card shops and to mass channel car departments and things like that. So car departments inside of grocery stores, inside of mass channel distributors like Walmart and Kmart, like that. Yeah. And I said, I want you to to dress like a customer dresses. I don't want you to take a notepad. So I don't want you to look like you're doing research.
Yeah.
But I want you to hang out in the card department, and I want you to listen to people. I want to listen to how they find cards, because we were trying to determine a new merchandising strategy at that time.
Okay.
And what we were doing was we were creating these lines of greeting cards that were highly targeted, and we'd give them these fancy names.
Yeah.
And then what I noticed was we were putting a tagline on every one of these names.
Uh-huh.
And so I did a presentation after we got that informal research. I did a presentation that I marched around Hallmark that was entitled "A Tagline is an Apology for a Bad Name."
Yeah.
And it was because what we learned in the shops was that people were looking, they'd say, I'm looking for a card that has poetry and features nice pictures.
Uh-huh.
And I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, we call that line windows. Well, they don't know that.
Yeah.
So what we did is, the name would be like windows, and it would say cards featuring poetry and beautiful photography. And we flipped it. We said, okay, let's put the emphasis on what this is, and de-emphasize what we call it. Let's give it the moniker to give it a collection feel,
meaning,
but let's help them find what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Not try to get caught up on ourselves. Again, it's the mirror and window thing. Not get caught up in ourselves on our own opinion, but let's see if we can't grab words that the consumers are using and reuse those words and use them in a way that they can look at them and find what they need very quickly. And it changed our merchandising strategy very quickly. And we found that people were not leaving the card department frustrated because they couldn't find what they were looking for. And most of the time it
sales
was there.
started to pick up.
Right. So they just couldn't find it. So we looked at things like average purchase, time in the card department, things like that gave us indication on whether or not people were finding what they needed, because we knew they needed a greeting card. We had research on that.
Yeah.
What we didn't know a whole lot about was why they were leaving without one.
Yeah.
So it's simple blocking and tackling, Matt. I mean, it's just very basic stuff, but people just don't bother to do it because a lot of times they say, yeah, I know that, we already know that part.
Yeah.
Well, you maybe you don't. I mean, and if you can at least go to the field and do that observational research. We did another big project for a pet food company. Okay. And what we were looking for was what is the value of the recommendation coming from a veterinarian? And what we found was that people were kind of on to the fact that veterinarians might be getting some sort of financial incentive to recommend a particular product. And so what they would do was literally when they were checking out and setting the next appointment or paying their bill or whatever, they'd lean over and say to the receptionist, "Do you have a dog?" And the receptionist, if they'd say yes, then they'd say, "What do you feed your dog?" The veterinarian was just recommending this, but I think that's an expensive food. And the recommendation was coming from the reception area, not so much the one that they were paying attention to. And we had a research director that I just loved, and she was nodding her head, and she said, "You need to subscribe to the Edelman Trust Barometer." And so I wrote that down, and I followed that study now for about 20 years. It's Edelman Trust Barometer, and what that is it's a study they do every year about who people trust. And several years ago, they came up with this principle around I trust people like me. So it shifted from people in positions of authority, educators, people that were advanced in business, physicians, to a degree, politicians. It shifted from that into I'm more comfortable taking advice from people that feel like me, that seem more like me. And where you can really see that working is web-based purchase, e-commerce. So how many times does a consumer check the ratings or the reviews, the consumer reviews, before making a purchase? Almost all the time. And those reviews and those stars are being given by people like me. And so Edelman recognized that. They've since shifted that a little bit, knowing that a lot of CPGs and companies that are selling a lot through e-com are now pushing more comments and providing some of those comments themselves, so that it's not as trustworthy as it was at the very beginning of this. But it's essentially the strategy that Dell used years and years ago. Dell's customer service was done by the customers, that they had customer forums and groups that would answer questions about Dell computers that literally came from consumers.
Yeah.
Because they knew that the consumers were much more trustworthy than anybody else.
Do you think that ties in then to what about garnering video testimonials, like real ones, not actor portrayals, if you can get them?
Yeah. And I think too, we just had this conversation with one of our clients about influencers, power of influencers. And I said, just like other things, I think that's beginning to start to get into
people are
being overrated. I think a lot of those folks are so well compensated that at the beginning, where they were a credible source for advice, a lot of influencers are so motivated by the financial impact that
they would recommend a product even if they don't. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. One of the questions that you'd sent me ahead of time, I was fascinated by, and it literally kept me up one night. I was thinking about it so much.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm an insomniac now, so thank you very much. Actually, I've always been an insomniac. My mind, I have a really, really hard time of getting my mind to stop. But your question was about AI and the rise of artificial intelligence and copywriting. Yeah. And I coach my son's Little League baseball team.
Okay.
And we use a tool to help manage our practices and manage the games and things like that, called Game Changer. And Game Changer has this feature after a game that it writes this recap on your game. Yeah. And it says, Precision outduels Mavericks 8-7 in a battle of pitchers. Yeah. And it goes through and mentions kids' names, and it's a very well constructed, very well written piece of copy, and it's AI. Wow. Because it's pulling information from the play by play, and it's hitting certain algorithms that say, okay, pick this paragraph and fill in these blanks with this information. They're extremely well constructed, and they're very readable. And my son and I cannot wait to read these things after the games. They usually pop up about 10, 15 minutes after a game is over. And they're amazing. Wow. The question that you had asked was, does AI ever replace copywriting at some point in time? Yeah. And or
human being, I guess human. Yeah. Yeah. Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly. Yeah. That's better phrased. But see, AI would have phrased that better than I just did. Yeah, but I think the answer is no, because there are certain things that artificial intelligence can handle, but I don't think that artificial intelligence is capable yet of creating a creative idea. Yeah. And one of the things I speak to college classes often, and one of the themes that I always bring up with them is don't underestimate the power of the idea, and don't ever let technology or a technique overshadow the idea. Yeah. Because there are so many whiz bang things we can do to make something jump out and to look and sound great, but they all have to be based on a good idea, on a big idea. And I think artificial intelligence isn't there yet. I don't know if we'll ever have artificial creativity. I think we have artificial intelligence.
You hit the nail on the head. I think that artificial intelligence, from my experience, is a tool. It can be a very useful tool, just like a framer takes a hammer, or a carpenter takes all of his tools to work. That, artificial intelligence, I don't think, at least in my mind and from my experience right now, and I can speak to that and off camera, share some things with you. I think it's a tool that people can use. I don't think at this point in time, it can think of new ideas. I think it can extrapolate, if that's the right word, on existing ideas, and even make an existing idea better. Yeah. But you still have to have the idea, and new ideas and innovation. I don't know. And like you said, the creative part of the human being is so phenomenal. And I think you hit on the head. We'll always need, because I've used AI. You can input stuff and get crappy stuff out.
Yeah.
Easily. You can input crappy and get crap, but you can input some good stuff and get some really good stuff out.
Yeah.
If you do it right.
Yeah. I had a funny experience at Hallmark one day. We had an opportunity to meet just incredible people at that place and work with incredible people. And I worked there for 10 years, and the first 4 were as a writer, greeting card writer and merchandising and other things. And then I moved into promotions and then national advertising manager. But when I was a writer, it was a really funny experience. I was walking across this square that's in front of Hallmark that opens up to, there's a retail place on the other side of it. And I was looking at this man who was walking towards me.
Yeah.
I was walking with the president of the company. And I recognized him, but I couldn't put my finger on who it was. I kept staring at him thinking, I know who that is, but I can't think of his name. Yeah. And as soon as we got to within 2 or 3 feet of each other, he knew I was staring at him. And just spilled out of my mouth. I said, "Well, hello, Mr. Rogers." And it was Fred Rogers from Mr. Rogers'
Get out
Neighborhood.
Of town. Wow.
And he stopped and he shook my hand and he said, I'm glad you know my name, but I don't know your name. And I said, "Well, my name's Tom." And he said, "What do you do here?" And I said, "I'm a writer." And he said, "I think that's fantastic." He said to Don Hall, who was the founder's son, he said, "Don, do I have time in my schedule to visit with Tom sometime this afternoon?" And Don said, "Sure, Fred, we'll carve out some time." And so he came over to my office, and I was working on some writing assignments and had a stack of needs that they had. And he asked me, he said, "Tom, how do you think of your ideas?" And I said, "I really don't know. I shoot a couple of Nerf hoop shots every so often. I spin my dictionary on my fingers. Sometimes I sit like this, and they just kind of happen. So I don't know that there's a science to creativity. I think it's kind of a miraculous gift, and
I agree.
I think that miraculous gift gets its beginnings from observation and from context, and from common language and presenting that back to the people who provided it.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. I think it's something you're born with. That, and if you're not born with it, I'm not necessarily sure that it can be taught and trained into somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is an amazing place. We could talk for another 2 hours. I know we could.
I know we could too.
I'd love to have you back. But what's one big takeaway you want listeners to get from this episode?
Well, of course, the VOC thing. I think that's a good takeaway. But the other thing that I say a lot to our clients as well, and I hope that there are lots of small businesses that listen to this podcast, because I think this is important. It's always better to outsmart than it is to outspend. And if you have a huge budget and can flood the market with noise, then sure, you're going to get some attention. But the ones that really do cut through the clutter and gather attention really are the ones that outsmarted somebody, didn't necessarily outspend them. And the way I believe that you consistently outsmart your competitor is by getting down there in the trenches and really understanding your target, using their language, allowing them to feel like you've heard them and you're honoring them and are building your creative presentation around them. And the copywriting has a voice to it that if you closed your eyes, you could hear somebody speaking to you and somebody that you could easily be friends with. I know that sounds kind of flowery and frankly kind of hallmarky, but
it's true.
It is true. And
I know it's true. From everything I've
applied
studied.
Yeah. I've applied that to every type of consumer product good you could even think of. And sometimes sometimes you're compassionate. Sometimes you're scientific. Sometimes you've got some humor involved. And sometimes we framed, for that dog food company, we framed their voice of their brand. We said the friendly veterinarian that lives next door. And so, it wasn't overly scientific. It was friendly and approachable. So I think when you focus on trying to outsmart rather than outspend, I think you're on the right path.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for sharing that. And thanks again for being here. How can our listeners connect with you online if they choose to do so?
LinkedIn is a great way to do that.
LinkedIn?
I ignored LinkedIn for the longest time, and over the last couple of years, I've gotten a little bit more active. Happy to connect that way. Happy to answer questions people have, and happy to connect that way, and
sure.
Happy to learn from you.
Yeah, I'll make sure to put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And again, it's an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the show.
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much too. Thank you for having me.